Hi, on this episode of the Tortilla Cat Files, first of all, I'm a scholar and I'm your host today. I forgot to say that part. On this episode, we're going to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. This was actually a request by one of the commenters on the videos, and I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get to this. I got other stuff I had to do first, but here we are. This one's very interesting. This one is a little bit before my time. It happened in 1962, and I wasn't born until 1964. So it's in that time period where, honestly, when I was in school, we didn't talk about it a whole lot because it was still too new. So it was an opportunity for me to do a little research into something that I've heard about my whole life, but hadn't actually gone back and read a whole lot about. So let me share my screen with my mad computer skills here. And we want to start from the beginning. Okay, there we go. And we will talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, first of all, we have to talk about the United States and the USSR, or the Soviet Union, as we used to call it. The Soviet Union formed, actually, the Russian Republic formed in 1918. The Tsar of Russia, who was kind of like the king of Russia, was overthrown. I'm sure you've all heard the story of Anastasia. You've seen that movie, which is not completely historically, not even a little bit historically accurate. And at some point, we will probably talk about that because it's a really cool story in a really sad way. But a man named Lenin came to power, and when he died, he was replaced by a man named Joseph Stalin. And Stalin expanded Russia into this huge dark red area that you see here with this hammer and sickle. This down here with the stars is China. It is separate, but they were sort of allies at this point. World War II happened, as you know. Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany. The entire world kind of lined up to fight him. And at that point, at least in name, Russia, or the USSR, and America were allies. We didn't have the same political system. The United States is a democracy and the USSR was communist, but we were both united against the Nazis. So in 1945, when World War II got over, the USSR that's when they actually started becoming the USSR. They made a land grab. They grabbed up a whole lot of They grabbed up a whole lot of territory here in the eastern part of Europe. They grabbed up as much as they could get, and even grabbed half of Germany. So that's when tensions began to happen between the United States and the USSR. We had been friends, we had been allies, but we didn't really like each other. And now they were starting to do stuff that really made us angry. So this is a period that began what was called the Cold War. And the Cold War means that you're hostile towards each other, but you're not actually shooting at each other. And we will talk more about the Cold War in another episode and really break that down. So that's where we are. The USSR and the US are kind of watching each other out of the corners of their eye to make sure that, neither one of them is going to make a first move, because both countries at this point in time, when we're talking about, have nuclear weapons. And everybody's afraid as long as you've got a nuclear weapon, you might as well use it, We don't want to do that. So everybody's watching each other really closely to make sure nobody's going to make the first move. Okay, so now we have to talk about Cuba. Cuba at the time in the 1940s and before, and somewhat before, was controlled by a man named General Fulgencio Batista. He was backed by the United States, and mostly the United States wanted him to stay in power because he was friendly towards American business interests. American businesses controlled most of the sugar production, most of the cattle ranches, most of the mines, and all of the utilities like electricity and water power in Cuba. And so they were making a whole lot of money. And American businesses are really good about finding a little island somewhere and kind of taking it over and taking over all of the means of production and then putting in, getting the government to put in somebody that's in charge that's nice to the businesses. We've done this a lot of times. And I'll be honest, it almost never works out the way we hope it will. And it should be a lesson to us, and it never seems to be. There we are. Cuba at this time also had a lot of casinos, and it was a vacation destination. People from America would go there because it was very close to America, well, still very close to America, but it was sort of like Las Vegas before Las Vegas existed. It was where you went to have a really good time, and stuff that happened in Cuba stayed in Cuba, that kind of a thing, okay? So the people of Cuba, the people who lived there, were not real happy with the situation because they didn't have a lot of rights. General Batista was was sort of a dictator. He was a very ruthless ruler. He did not allow for civil liberties. There were no personal freedoms in Cuba. It was not a great place to live if you were living there. It was a really cool place to visit, but for the people that lived there, not so much. So they were not happy about this. And so on January the 1st of 1959, a man named Fidel Castro seized power. He was backed up by a group of people who wanted to end General Batista's rule and did it. And on January the 1st of 1959, the people rose up. They took power. Fidel Castro came out on top, and he was now the ruler of Cuba. He took control of all of the manufacturing. He believed in the communist system, which is what the USSR had, in which the country owns everything. People do not own their own land. People don't own their own houses. People don't own their own cars. People don't own anything. The government owns it all, and the government gives some of it to you. So it's a completely different system than the US has, and the US is rightfully concerned about having this very close to where they are. In 1960, Cuba allied with the USSR. This gave them an opportunity to receive military and economic aid, because when Fidel Castro came into power, basically the rest of the world went, no. You know, you've taken control of all of the mines. You've taken control of all the stuff that all these companies owned. You stole all this stuff basically and gave it to the people. We don't like the idea of that happening. We really don't like the idea of that being able to happen in our countries. And so, no, Cuba, we're going to boycott you. Boycott means we're not going to buy anything from you. We're not going to sell anything to you. Nobody's going to go to your country and visit. Nothing. You get no money from us at all in any situation. So Cuba was kind of cut off from the rest of the world economically. So the USSR comes in and says, hey, we'll be your friend. And Fidel Castro took him up on it. So, as I said, America was very concerned about the fact that now they have a socialist or communist nation so very close to America. I'll show you a map of that on another slide. And so under President Eisenhower, they began planning what they called the Bay of Pigs invasion. Now, the Bay of Pigs is a place in Cuba. It's not, we're calling this that because it's a code name. That's actually its name. It's this is a picture of the Bay of Pigs here. And it was a CIA plot, and they were going to remove Castro from office and take Cuba back. And what they were going to do is they had 1,400 people who had come from Cuba. These were Cuban people who had fled and come to America, and they trained them. The CIA trained them in military operations and was going to give them arms and give them ammunition and send them back to Cuba to fight and take Cuba back. They began with the bombing the airfield. This all started on April 17th in 1961. They began by bombing the airfield, but somebody had tipped Castro off that this bombing was coming. And so he had moved all of his airplanes. And so no airplanes got bombed during all of this bombing. There was an unnoticed radio broadcast tower very near to the airfield and very near to the beach where they were going to make this invasion, the beginning of this invasion, that nobody had noticed. And so when they started the invasion, these people in this broadcast tower were broadcasting it to everybody in Cuba. So everybody in Cuba knew exactly what was going on. This was not a surprise. It was not a stealthy attack. And so, things started going bad right from the beginning. There were parachuters that were supposed to jump in and support the invaders. It was going to be like a mini D-Day invasion. You have the troops coming in from the sea. You have other troops that are parachuting in. It was supposed to work like that. It worked on the D-Day invasion, not so much here. The backup parachuters had the wrong coordinates and parachuted into completely the wrong place and were almost immediately arrested. The people on the beach were then badly outnumbered, and they ended up surrendering in less than 24 hours. 114 of them were killed, and all of the rest were captured. This was a nightmare situation for the U.S., for those poor people that went back into Cuba to try to take it over. It went really ugly, really, really fast. What are you doing, cat? Leave that alone. Sorry. Weirdo. Bass has got, the zoomies this morning. Apparently he's roaming all over the kitchen. Please excuse any weird noises you might hear. So that's what happened there. President Kennedy comes into power, John F. Kennedy comes into power. Things are going along pretty well. And then on October the 14th of 1962, a U.S. spy plane, a U-2 spy plane, these are planes that fly very, very high, and they take pictures. Basically, it's like early type of satellite photography, because we didn't have satellites that could take pictures like this back then. But it flew over Cuba. It was captained by a man named Major Richard Heiser, and he photographed what, upon analysis, turned out to be a Soviet SS-4 missile being assembled in Cuba. And according to this, these are the dollies that carry the missile. This is the missile transporters. All of this stuff in here is something to do with the missile. Now, honestly, I can't tell what this picture is. But apparently people that knew what they were doing could, and everybody freaked right out about it. Now, a Soviet SS-4 missile was a medium-range ballistic missile. It could travel 2,000 kilometers or 1,243 miles, and it carried 1 megaton nuclear device that could destroy up to 80 square miles. One missile could destroy up to 80 square miles. This is what it looked like. This is not in Cuba. This is actually in Russia. This is in the Kremlin Square, and in some sort of a parade. And this is how long it was. You can see the people there for perspective. This was a big piece of equipment. And now it's right here in our backyard. Here's the map I was going to show you. See, here's Florida. We all know what Florida looks like. This is Cuba right down here. That's not that far. It's about 90 miles from Cuba to Florida, okay? So on October the 16th, 1962, you may wonder how come there was a delay. Well, they have to look at all these photographs, and they had to have analysts look at all these photographs. And that's when they realized what they were seeing in that picture. And they went, we got to go talk to the president. So President Kennedy was briefed. That means the situation was explained. This was bad because the missiles were now going to be very close to the U.S. Cuba's only 90 miles from Florida. This is potentially a really bad situation because always before, there have been no missiles close enough to the US to reach us. We had missiles stationed in Western Europe, in West Germany, in Turkey, in various places in Europe, so that we had missiles that were close enough that we could launch and hit the USSR if we needed to, which gave us a really big advantage. But nobody had missiles that were big enough to launch from the USSR and hit the United States. So this was going to take away part of our advantage. And you see here from Cuba, the missiles could reach Mexico City, they could reach Los Angeles, they could reach Denver and Colorado. I don't know what that's pointing to up there because I cut that off. They could reach, it looks like maybe, I don't know, Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, Washington, D.C., New York. All of these things were now within the reach of these missiles, right there in Cuba, very close to the United States. And this would totally take away the United States missile advantage. Pardon me. So President Kennedy spent a little while with his advisors thinking about ways that we could make this come out the way we want to without getting a whole bunch of people killed. The first thing they talked about was maybe bombing Cuba. They didn't really want to do that. They talked about just flat out invading Cuba and fighting the USSR. Kennedy debated this for about a week and decided to do a naval blockade. Now, a blockade is where you get all of your Navy ships and you kind of put them in a big ring around Cuba so that Cuba is now cut off and isolated. It's surrounded, and that'll keep the Soviets from being able to bring any more stuff in. Hey, quit that nonsense. Sorry. We'll keep them from being able to bring any more material in because Cuba didn't have an airstrip big enough to land on with these big jets at that time. So everything that they were going to bring that was this big equipment had to come by ship. So they were going to put this naval blockade around so that couldn't happen. Don't walk on the computer. Thank you. So on October the 22nd, 1962, Kennedy goes on television and announces an ultimatum. An ultimatum is a statement being made to another party saying, this is what's going to happen. If you don't do this, we're going to do this. It's an if-then statement. If you keep doing this, this is what's going to happen. You're all right. Settle down. The American people were extremely concerned about nuclear war all through the 50s and then up into the 60s. They had been concerned that at some point the Russians were going to launch nuclear weapons, and because we had seen what happened with nuclear weapons when the US used them against Japan in the end of World War II. And it was horrible. We knew that this was a horrible weapon to use. It was a horrible weapon to have. And everyone was concerned that this was going to be used again and against us this time. Some people began hoarding food and gasoline. Now think back to when in 2020 when the pandemic was rolling good and we would go to the stores and we couldn't buy toilet paper. That's hoarding. People were buying stuff because they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to get it when they needed it. And so they were buying way more than they needed at any time. And it creates problems. We're still having supply chain problems in 2021. That's the kind of thing, people are worried. I'm not going to be able to get gasoline. I better get a lot of it now. I'm not going to be able to get food. I better buy everything I can find. Oh my goodness, I'm afraid I can't get toilet paper. That's that mindset. And school children, thank you, Scout. Thank you for that. Yeah. Practice what were called duck and cover drills, which meant that when the announcement was made, they would stop what they were doing, they would get under their desks and they would cover their heads up with their hands. This was supposed to protect them from a nuclear blast. Let me just tell you, it would not have protected them, but I guess that's all they knew to do back in the 60s. And so the kids were spending a whole week practicing this stuff. And everybody was right on the edge of freaking right out. It was a very intensely stressful time for everyone in America. Okay. On October the 24th, 1962, the Soviet ships that were on the way from Russia, because they knew that these ships were in the water, reached the blockade line, and they did not attempt to cross it. So now you've got the Russian ships sitting here and the American ships sitting here, and they're right there staring at each other. And this was an extremely tense time. What's going to happen? Are the Soviet ships going to fire on us? Are we going to fire on them? What's going to happen here? Everything was very, very tense, because at that moment, if anything went wrong, it was going to be a war. On October the 26th, 1962, Nikita Khrushchev responded to President Kennedy's ultimatum. Nikita Khrushchev was the premier of the Soviet Socialist Republic. He was like the president of Russia, except they don't get elected so much as they just are. He offered to remove the missiles if the United States promised that they would never invade Cuba. On October the 27th, 1962, a U.S. spy plane was shot down over Cuba. The pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson, was killed. And at this point, there were invasion forces that were being assembled in Florida. They were starting to send troops to Florida to get ready, because, you know, if you're going to launch an invasion into Cuba from the U.S., that's where you're going to go from, because that's the closest spot. And at that point, on the 27th, they received a second message from Nikita Khrushchev, and he was now offering to remove the missiles if the U.S. would close and remove the missiles from a military base in Turkey, which Turkey's very close to the USSR. These were the closest missiles to the USSR. On October the 28th, President Kennedy decided to accept the first offer, the one where we'll take the missiles out if you just promise not to invade Cuba. He sent his brother, who was the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, this is him, to deliver the response to the Russian ambassador in Washington, D.C. They publicly accepted the first offer. You take the missiles out, we promise not to invade Cuba. But in private, in talks with Nikita Khrushchev, we also accepted the second offer, and we'll also take the missiles out of Turkey. So the USSR got everything that they wanted, and we got no war, which is what we wanted, and the missiles out of Cuba. So this is a rare instance where pretty much everybody got what they wanted, except maybe the people in Cuba. In 1963, so the missiles were removed, everything went back to normal. And in 1963, a hotline phone was installed in the White House, which was a direct line between the President of the United States, whoever he was at the time, and the Premier of the USSR, whoever he was at the time. It was this red phone, and you used to see it in old pictures of the Oval Office. You used to see this red phone sitting there because, you know, it was the hotline, kind of like the bat phone, to be able to talk to the Russians, so that they could be able to talk directly to each other and maybe not have another situation like what had just happened in Cuba. Okay. So this situation ended successfully, and people went on about their lives. The only person who died was that gentleman that was the pilot of the U-2 plane that was shot down the day before the whole situation ended. But this was a situation that could have gone, if things had gone just a little bit different in a couple of places, could have gone to a full-out nuclear war, because both powers had nuclear weapons. This ended peacefully. It could have ended a whole lot differently. So thank goodness things ended the way that they did. That's really all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. Please let me know what you liked, didn't like, would like to know more about in the comments. Remember, you can always read more about this stuff if you are interested in it. Talk to your librarian in your school. Find out books that you can read. Books are amazing ways to find stuff out. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you the next time on the Tortilla Cat Files. All right, Sully, we're done.